This indigenous cult believed that Prince Philip was a god, while this cult leader convinced all his male followers to castrate themselves before the aliens came. According to psychologist Steve Eichel, up to 10,000 cults still exist today in the US alone. However, some cults are worse than others, starting with the most recent cult, NXIVM. Keith Raniere wasn't like any other child. At age 8, his parents separated.
Are you asking me for a divorce?
Yay! 2 Christmases!
Leaving him alone with his alcoholic, needy, and severely ill mother. However, Keith soon found an outlet that allowed him to escape the troubles at home. Around the time of the divorce, Keith's father was convinced that their son was too smart for his age and took him to do an intelligence test. After the test, which suggested Keith was gifted, his behavior changed completely. According to his father, it was almost like a switch went off, and suddenly, overnight, he turned into like Jesus Christ. Now, I'm not anti-parental encouragement, but if your child starts acting like he's Jesus Christ, you should probably take him to a therapist. As a child, Keith was a small, nerdy kid, seemingly the perfect target for bullies. However, it was actually Keith who would go on to bully and terrorize his classmates. Lacking any physical prowess, Keith's only option was psychological manipulation. At age 12, he read Isaac Asimov's Second Foundation, a science fiction novel all about mind control. Keith's mother recalled dozens of girls calling their house and a 13-year-old Keith telling each one of them, "I love you, you're the special one, you're important, you're the only one in my life, and I love you." Another huge red flag that no one did anything about. However, despite being supposedly extremely gifted, his education failed to reflect that. He graduated with a mere 2.26 GPA, a C-level student. Also, it wasn't Yale or Harvard that Keith attended, it was Rensselaer Polytechnic Institute. Genius or not, Keith always had that hustler mindset.
In the world of Amway, this could be you.
You know, we never had the money to feel really independent until we discovered Amway.
Throughout the 80s, he worked as a distributor for Amway, a multi-level marketing company that looks very similar to a pyramid scheme. Inspired by the success of Amway, in 1990, Keith launched his own MLM called Consumers Byline Inc.
Consumers Byline may help you.
That's when he met Tony Natalie. Initially persuaded by her husband, she joined the company, later moving to live closer to Raniere. The two started dating, and eventually she divorced her husband. Unfortunately, Natalie wouldn't be the only woman brainwashed by Keith to leave her family. By 1993, the company was being investigated by 20 different states. New York State filed a lawsuit, alleging that CBI was indeed a pyramid scheme.
Now, efforts to reach Consumers Byline president or legal counsel were unsuccessful today.
Raniere was issued a $40,000 fine, of which he only paid $9,000, claiming not to have enough money, despite also claiming a multi-million-dollar net worth. After a few sketchy enterprises that sooner or later went down, Natalie began to question Keith's true motives. In 1997, she met Nancy Salzman, a psychiatric nurse and hypnotist, and asked her to speak with Keith to figure out if he's a genius or a psycho. 4 days later, Nancy came back with glazed eyes. "You don't know him, he's going to change the world. He's light years ahead of us." Keith the psychopath and Nancy the hypnotist soon joined forces and founded Executive Success Programs. If that sounds too vague, 2 years later it was rebranded as NXIVM. NXIVM was a self-improvement company, with the main goal being to help people experience more joy in their lives. A whopping 18,000 people enrolled in Keith's classes, who later insisted on being called Vanguard. Interestingly, Keith's clients weren't the traditional down on their luck with nothing to lose kind of people. In fact, Keith hated poor people. To join the cult, you had to pay around $5,000 per month and up to $10,000 for special classes. So what do you learn in these classes? Well, by all accounts, a weird mix of Ayn Rand, Scientology, and Raniere's personal philosophy, which is basically a rehashing of Socrates, Kant, and Nietzsche. In most of these classes, Keith wasn't even present. Instead, a recording of him would be played in some hotel conference room. If the classes sound like a scam, well, it's because they were. NXIVM targeted desperate, gullible, yet attractive and influential people. Keith understood that having good-looking, successful people in his cult would attract more members, and having rich people would help him pay the bills. Speaking of attractive people, the group managed to convince Smallville actress Allison Mack to join them in 2006.
I'm devoted to you. I love you.
Keith Raniere.
As the cult's reputation increased, its practices got a lot more dark. Unsurprisingly, all members were encouraged to separate themselves from their families, a theme that is very familiar to cults. All members had to wear colored sashes that represented their rank within the group. Plus, female members had to greet Keith with a kiss on the mouth when he entered the room. And you guessed it, Keith did not abstain from having sexual relationships with his followers, including underage girls. Camila was just 13 years old when she met Keith. 2 years later, they began a sexual relationship. Gina Hutchinson, another of Keith's 15-year-old victims, was told she was a Buddhist goddess whose soul was much older than her body and that she was destined to be with him.
That's f***ing illegal.
However, things are about to get even more creepy. In 2015, Raniere created a secret subgroup within NXIVM called DOS, short for Dominus Obsequious Sororum, which was supposed to mean Master over Slave Women in Latin. However, despite being a so-called genius, he fails to sound smart as the phrase makes no sense in Latin. Simply put, DOS is a sex cult. Remember Allison Mack, the Smallville actress? Well, she was put in charge of it, and oh boy did she not disappoint. Her job was to recruit other vulnerable women on the pretense that they were joining a sisterhood, a group all about women empowerment. Before joining, each woman had to provide incriminating information about themselves as so-called collateral. This ranged anywhere from sexually explicit photographs to huge amounts of money. The reason behind it was simple: to discourage members from leaving the program. DOS was like NXIVM, but much worse. The women were put on a 500-calorie diet, sleep-deprived, and forced to watch footage of other women being murdered and dismembered. All of this, supposedly, to strengthen their mental fortitude, while in reality it just made them easier targets for Keith. What's more, Keith suggested to Allison that the members of DOS should get a tattoo of his initials on their inner thighs to show their loyalty to the program. While Allison liked the idea, she thought a tattoo wasn't enough, as it's relatively painless and can be easily hidden. She suggested something more permanent: to burn Keith's initials into their body. The women were given no anesthetic and branded like cattle. From that point on, they were the property of Keith, with their main goals in life being to sleep with him and to recruit new members. They also weren't allowed to have romantic relationships with other men. Not only that, they couldn't go to sleep or eat anything without Keith's permission. The cherry on top is that they were made to feel that all of this was consensual, and somehow made them into stronger, independent women. However, Keith's ambitions went beyond just holding sex slaves. He intended to control women in positions of power all around the world.
I've had people killed because of my beliefs and because of their beliefs.
In 2017, several members of DOS contacted the New York State authorities about some of the horrendous abuse within the group. After reported in the New York Times, a criminal investigation began, forcing Raniere to move into a villa in Mexico. Soon, he was arrested and charged with racketeering conspiracy, sex trafficking, attempted sex trafficking conspiracy, forced labor conspiracy, and wire fraud conspiracy. With long and detailed statements from more than a dozen of his victims, Keith Raniere was sentenced to 120 years in prison. Allison Mack was also charged. However, she was sentenced to just 3 years in prison, of which she only served 2 of them and was released in July of 2023. Most women involved got nothing more than a slap on the wrist. NXIVM's co-founder, Nancy Salzman, was sentenced to 42 months in prison but was released in less than half of that. The only good news is that Keith Raniere is still in prison, although adamant that the trial was a sham and constantly asking for a retrial. During the cult's peak, Raniere had also gotten a sort of a blessing from none other than Dalai Lama himself. But there's more. Not only did NXIVM pay $2 million to arrange the meeting, but Raniere's confidant, Sarah Brofman, even had sex with Dalai Lama's gatekeeper, Lama Tenzin, a fellow monk. What's even crazier is that NXIVM is neither the only nor the worst cult that got Dalai Lama's blessing. Asahara Shoko had the cards stacked against him from the start. He was born in 1955 to a poor family of tatami mat makers in Japan. He had infantile glaucoma from birth, which made him partially blind in his right eye and completely blind in his left eye. Japan had a pretty f***ed up view of children with disabilities at the time. Many parents thought that birth defects were a punishment from God. Not to mention that between 1948 and 1966, more than 16,500 women and men with various disabilities were sterilized against their will under a eugenics law. Good job, Japan. Therefore, it's not so surprising that Asahara's parents decided to get rid of him at just 6 years old after enrolling him in a school for the blind. Starting to feel bad for the little guy? Well, I'm about to change that. Same as Kiefer Nier, Asahara soon started bullying and manipulating his classmates. As he was the only student with some vision left, he took advantage of this by beating other students and extorting their money. Unsurprisingly, during his teenage years, he started developing grandiose aspirations, including ruling a kingdom of robots and becoming the prime minister.
Okay, calm down, bro.
After graduation, Asahara was rejected from medical school. Around this time, Asahara developed an interest in spirituality and joined a small religion called the Gonshu, a mixture of Hinduism and Buddhism. But everything changed in 1987 when Asahara decided to create his own religious movement, Aum Shrinkyo, which translates to Supreme Truth. It started as innocent yoga and meditation classes. However, with Asahara's confidence, charisma, and genius marketing, the number of followers grew rapidly. He infamously claimed to be able to levitate, and somehow people fell for it. What's more, there was even a 10-series anime about Asahara, meant to attract younger followers. To no one's surprise, the group quickly turned into a doomsday cult. Asahara prophesied about the end of humanity, except, of course, for those who joined him. But there was a twist. It wouldn't be God or aliens who would bring about this end, but the US, by starting World War III and a nuclear Armageddon. Oh, and he started calling himself the Holy Pope, Savior of the country, and Tokyo's Christ. In other words, how to say you're an egomaniac without saying you're an egomaniac.
In addition to working for me, you may now praise me as your almighty.
On top of that, Asahara Shoko also had a side hustle of selling his bath water to his biggest supporters. However, this creepy cult is about to get a lot more legitimacy. Probably the stupidest decision by the Tokyo Metropolitan Government was made in 1989 when Aum Shrinkyo was granted legal status as a religious organization. This seemingly insignificant ruling changed everything. To make matters worse, Dalai Lama, yes, the same Dalai Lama, had a meeting with Asahara. Besides the two laughing and meditating together, their meeting not only legitimized Aum Shrinkyo, but also contributed to more than a dozen people perishing. Asahara's wife had no interest in joining the cult, so she was whipped 50 times with a cane and locked in isolation to meditate for 7 weeks.
I built a massive isolation chamber.
But this is just the tip of the iceberg. Asahara also ordered the killing of several members who contemplated leaving the cult. A lawyer by the name of Sakamoto Tsutsumi launched an investigation into the cult, not long before being murdered together with his wife and the 1-year-old child. At their peak, the cult had upwards of 60,000 members, making it one of the biggest cults in human history. But the cult still needed to somehow cover its expenses. Aum Shrinkyo began producing methamphetamines and LSD and selling them to Japanese organized crime group Yakuza.
What is this shit? This is blue.
We use a different chemical process, but it is every bit as pure.
However, Asahara quickly realized that he could use his followers' biochemistry skills for something far more sinister. In 1993, Aum began mass-producing sarin, a nerve agent that can lead to vomiting, loss of consciousness, convulsions, paralysis, and suffocation. Their first attempt at terrorism was releasing a gas called anthrax from the rooftop to try and cause an anthrax epidemic. Fortunately, some of the cult members did contact the authorities, and the plan was a failure. Their next target was supposed to be the courthouse, where they would release deadly sarin gas. At the last minute, they decided to target the judges' homes instead. However, after sarin was released into the area, its effect was far greater than expected. 8 people died from the attack, while 274 were sent to hospital. But the next attack would be far more deadly and cause unprecedented amounts of collective trauma. On the morning of March 20th, 1995, 5 cult members carrying stashes of liquid sarin boarded 3 different lines in a Tokyo subway. The plan was simple: to hide the bags, pierce them, and leave the train at the next station. The attack was devastating, killing 14 and injuring 6,500 more. To this day, the attack is still one of the largest cases of domestic terrorism in Japanese history. The cult attempted a few more terrorist attacks, but most of them were unsuccessful. The Japanese police finally got their shit together and a few months later arrested Asahara together with 398 of his followers. Asahara was sentenced to death in 2004. However, the cult is technically still active. It has rebranded itself to Aleph and later to the Circle of Rainbow Light. At least now, they are under constant supervision by the police. What this all shows us is that Dalai Lama really needs to do better research before he talks to people. While most people would understandably be terrified to be around Asahara or his followers, the members of the next cult are some of the nicest people on earth. Marshall Applewhite had a fairly promising yet uneventful childhood. From an early age, he was liked by everyone around him, as he was charismatic, talented, and funny. Marshall always dreamed of becoming a preacher, as his father was a Presbyterian minister. However, Marshall's real talents were acting and singing. In later years, he tried but failed as an actor in New York City. Instead, he became an assistant professor as well as a choir director. However, things quickly started going downhill when he was fired for having an affair with a male student. When his wife found out, she left him and took their 2 children. Around this time, Applewhite began experiencing depression and psychosis, largely due to struggles with his sexual identity and being disowned by his family and even the church. He was hospitalized at a mental health facility where he met a nurse named Bonnie Lou Nettles. This would mark the beginning of one of the strangest relationships ever. Bonnie and Marshall were hopeless, lonely people. Bonnie had a history of believing in aliens and looked forward to being taken by them.
I think we all know where this is going, so let's just skip to the end.
Soon enough, they started to see themselves as the Two, mentioned in the Book of Revelation, and that they were on an important spiritual mission. The Two were a lethal combo. Applewhite's religious framework, combined with Bonnie's science fiction ideas, inspired them to create the Heaven's Gate. The cult was sort of a doomsday cult. The couple claimed to be a level above human, sent to help others reach the next level, whatever that means. They basically took the Bible and replaced God, Jesus, and angels with extraterrestrial beings. These aliens would one day come to Earth and destroy everyone except people who believed in this crap. Unsurprisingly, Heaven's Gate also took a ton of inspiration from science fiction shows such as Star Trek. Like most cult leaders, they decided to give themselves funny names: Bo and Peep. Together, they attracted all kinds of people, with the youngest member being 26 and the oldest 72. The members were forced into a monk-style lifestyle, with sex, drinking, and smoking being strictly forbidden.
I know you've already heard us talk a lot about restraint, and that's because every member of the next level is restrained. Some, of course, are more restrained than others because they're older and they've had a longer chance to grow taller.
It's important to mention that there was no threat of physical violence. The members could leave whenever they wanted. However, with how desperate they were, very few people actually left. The Heaven's Gate aimed to be essentially genderless, with all members having the same baggy clothes, Nike sneakers, and short hair. All members had to get rid of their sexual urges, with some male members, including Applewhite, later choosing to castrate themselves.
All the guys here have been castrated. It's cool.
Hey, do you think that girl is hot? No, me neither.
Despite all of this, by all accounts, the people in the cult were some of the happiest people on Earth. The same cannot be said about the people they left behind. Many children had to watch their parents leave them with no explanation or guarantee that they would ever come back. However, in 1985, Bonnie Lou Nettles died of cancer. This temporarily broke Applewhite. How can she die if they're the chosen ones? When someone wants to believe something bad enough, they will always find an explanation. Applewhite quickly amended his teachings to say that the human body was just a vehicle, and then they would be giving a new body in the next level. As for Bonnie, her next level consciousness was simply too strong and burned up her body. Of course, the followers did not object to this explanation.
For tonight's special report, we look to the heavens and to the Hale-Bopp comet, the brightest in the Northern Hemisphere for nearly 100 years.
In 1995, the world was introduced to the Hale-Bopp comet, an unusually bright and large comet which would fly by Earth in a few years. While everyone was fascinated with the comet, no one as much as Marshall Applewhite. That was the sign he was waiting for. The comet had to be a spaceship coming to take them to the next level. In 1997, the comet was visible to the human eye, which meant Applewhite and his followers were about to make an exit. They had their last meal at a restaurant. According to other customers who were there, the group was extremely happy and friendly. When they got back to their headquarters, each of them drank a mixture of vodka and barbiturates and never woke up. Their bodies were found 5 days later by the police. While 39 people perished as a result of Marshall and Bonnie, the real victims are the families that these members left behind.